Good afternoon. It's Jim Norris from Backstage Insider. Just almost coming up on Christmas. Really glad today to have Mark Alexander with me. He's got, we'll get into it, but he's got a few job descriptions, so very long business cards. So just welcome today. Glad to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, if we can go back to your early days, your family, were your family involved in music or the arts or any areas like that?
No, definitely not. My father played piano, but
Okay.
there was no real. I think the music may have come from grandparents or things like that. Uh, but it started. I think I reached up when I was 3 years old. I reached up to the piano and plunked out a song, and then my parents realized, oh, that's "Smoke on the Water." the 3 year old the 3 year old figured it out, so they put me in music lessons at three
And
years
it
old.
was actually Smoke on the Water?
It was, yeah,
That's amazing. That's crazy.
just figured it out by
So
ear.
so when you got into school, after you were 3 years old, were you involved in music during public and high school?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was always like the piano player for school plays. I briefly went to Claude Watson, which is Toronto's first school for the arts.
Right.
And then in my high school band, I was actually the lowest achiever because my high school band, the four of us, there are Juno winners and Grammy winners,
Wow.
and there were a lot of I think Alex Lifeson actually went to my high school long before I was there. The school has a pretty rich musical tradition.
Oh,
But
that's
that was,
great.
yeah, A.Y. Jackson.
That helps a lot. And then university, you had some training there,
I went to York University for music because there were professors there that I wanted to study with.
right?
So yeah, I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in music composition. And then while I was there, I got sidetracked into education. So I also got a degree in teaching music as well. And
Oh, good.
that, yeah, so I was a music teacher in schools for a few years after university.
Oh, excellent. That's great. And then, so how did you end up in your current professions? How did you become a producer, I
Mhm.
guess, first off?
Yeah. After about 4 years of teaching, I realized I love music, but trying to teach 30, 13-year-olds at once was, I wasn't good at that.
No.
So I left the public school system and I started teaching in colleges. And I did some talks at Harris Institute. I taught at Trebas Institute for years. I taught at Metalworks for a little while. And I just found that I really liked that technology end of it better.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, I tried scoring films and I found I was really bad at that too. I didn't have the personality. The blank sheet of paper just killed me. So I have such a respect for people who can look at a film and I would, you know, twiddle keys for weeks and get nothing. But what I found that I loved was the tech side of it. I loved setting up cue sheets and like finding synchronization points. So I started doing that for other composers and it just snowballed from there.
Wow. So that's a kind of a unique occupation, I guess. I don't think there's a lot of people that specialize in those areas.
It's funny. One of my clients is a fairly big songwriter in Nashville, and I do work for him almost daily online. And he said I was busy one day, and he said, "I'll be honest, I looked for someone else to do what you do for me, and he couldn't find someone." Which I thought was bizarre because Nashville, everybody and his neighbor already owns a recording studio.
Yeah.
So, yeah, someone once told me find the thing that most people consider to be a pain in the butt, but you enjoy and make that your job. So that's what I've done. I like that whole idea of problem
That's
solving for
so
musicians.
so the technical part of it, the gear, the software, all of that, did you just kind of learn that as you went?
Yeah, I can't, bought my little 4-track Tascam Porta Studio in the 80s
Wow.
and went from there. And one of the first uh, sequencers was C Lab, and then became Notator, and that turned into Logic. Uh, so I've been using and teaching that for about 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing. So obviously, from your viewpoint, um, you could see the technology, how it's changed for studios and the artists and engineers. since the '80s. It's unbelievable the way it's gotten and continues to go that way.
Yeah, I wish I'd kept some of that. It's so funny because some of the technology back then that we thought was garbage is now considered vintage. And I'd sold these synthesizers for like $100 that now you see them on eBay for 10,000. So, I find that there are phases where things are popular, then not, then they are. But now it's almost too good. It's so easy. The tools for making music are so easy that anybody can do it, which sounds like a great thing, but it also means there's a lot of music coming out lately. I find that is it doesn't didn't come from someone who had studied music, so it almost sounds like it's created by AI, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you know Fred Mullen or not over the years. I interviewed him a while ago and we also did a webinar, but he talked about his background as a musician and a producer and film composer, and now he's just written a book as well. So he lives in Nashville, so he works in the studios down there a lot. And we talked about that, the good old days. And I was a musician many years ago and used to record on a Studer 4-track originally, and then we were at RCA Studios and they upgraded to 8 tracks. And for some reason, we ended up being the guinea pig. Every time they made an upgrade, the first session was us. I don't know whether there was a plan, but we went in an 8, 16 track, and then 24. And when it was 24, especially, we said, "Oh my God, 24 tracks! We're going to have to hire more musicians." I mean, that's a lot of tracks. Of course, nowadays it's nothing really. So it's hard to imagine how much that's changed, and I think a lot of it's very positive for the musicians, the technology that they have even at home.
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually the home thing is where things expanded for me. It was during COVID that
Right,
a lot of the musicians that I know who are in LA or Nashville, they went to recording studios and they had engineers doing all this stuff for them. All of a sudden COVID came and those studios shut down. They wanted to keep making music. So I was getting calls saying, my Pro Tools isn't working. How do I set up my inputs? How do I blah, blah? And this is just when Zoom was starting to get really popular. So I
right,
was able to screen share with them and click here and do that. So yeah, these are great music. I find most of my clients tend to be of the previous generation. I find
right.
that only because, if you're 30 or you grew up with this and it's not such a big deal. But for my musicians, they want to focus on music. They don't want to deal with operating systems and installations and passwords. So I let them do the music, and I say, just send it to me. I'll fix whatever the issues are.
Yeah, no, that's a better way to do it for sure, because really the artist shouldn't have to worry about all that. Um, shouldn't have to, but nowadays artists have to be concerned about a lot of things. So your company 905 Music and Sound, when did you actually start that as a company?
I don't know an exact year. I'd been doing that type of thing for almost 25 years. I
Right.
think that name came about maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
And it started out as make film scoring and jingles. I did a lot of work for Cineplex, all those pre-show things that you would see with like trivia games. I would do all the music for those.
Right.
Um, but after a while, again, especially with COVID, Cineplex's attendance dropped, and they they went to a different model. They weren't always hiring composers to create original things anymore. So that's when it transitioned into the more of the tech support. I still do music for people. Like I'm producing an album for someone right now. I'm producing a musical for someone right now. But yeah, the 905 is mostly I do some teaching, like I'll teach production and logic and things like that, and the tech support.
So what's your recording platform of choice nowadays? Do you use Pro Tools or do you use all of them or
I use all of them because I'll get students who ask me questions. 95% of the time, I'm in logic.
Right.
just because
Okay.
it's the one. Like I said, I've been using it since it came out,
Right.
since it before it was called Logic. I use Pro Tools maybe once a week just to deliver. If I have to deliver sessions, people want Pro Tools. But I've learned the best DAW is just the DAW you're most comfortable with. So if you're happy with Reaper, use Reaper. They all essentially do mostly the same thing, you know.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And are most of your clients nowadays, are they musicians or studios or both? Or
Yeah, I don't want to name drop because some of them are like fairly high level people with
oh,
like
sure.
one of my composers he scores the top TV show on every Canadian network.
Right.
And if you go on my website, you can read the testimonials of who they are, but they're mostly successful musicians who don't want to be bothered saying, why isn't this file opening? And they just want to make music, which is, I tell that to everyone. I say, sit down for a day, learn your software, set it up, and then forget about it. And then, because when you're writing, if you have a great musical idea, there's nothing worse than having to stop and be like, why isn't my synthesizer loading? So, because then you're distracted from the music.
I find most people, certainly in dealing with staff over the years, because I've always been into technology, but I find most people don't put in the time to learn it properly. And we had staff and they'd fire it up and just start, clicking on things and wonder why it's not working very well. And they only really, you've got software that, regardless of what it costs, it's got a lot of functionality, and they're using 2% of it maybe at the
Yeah.
most. And yet they don't sit down and, in the old days, it was a case of actually looking at the manual, but now it might be, going to the support sites and um, just doing the work, I guess, to take the time to learn it properly, because it's not easy sometimes. And being computers, they every once in a while they just lose their mind, you know, and
Yeah.
you gotta kind of have patience for that. My wife's parents were Scottish, and, when they got frustrated, I'd say, "When in doubt, reboot," because sometimes that's what you have to do is just computer starts over and says, "Okay, I know where I am." But sometimes the computer just goes down this road and it thinks it's a pencil sharpener. I mean, it doesn't know what the hell it is.
You'd be surprised how many problems that fixes. Uh, you mentioned support sites. You have to be really careful online. A lot of my clients have just said, "Oh, I just asked ChatGPT how to do it,"
Right,
and ChatGPT is amazing. But the problem is, ChatGPT is sourced from the internet, and
right.
the internet is filled with misinformation.
Yeah,
So ChatGPT, a friend of mine said, is often very confidently wrong, and
yeah,
it will give you. So I'll say, "How do I do this?" Just I went to check it. I said, "How do I do this in Logic?" And it gave me. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, "That's absolutely not true. These are menu items that don't even exist in Logic." And I said, "That's not right." It said, "Oh, you're right. Thank you for calling me out on that."
yeah,
So I tell people, be careful sourcing your information online. There are like for Logic, there are all these people, these gurus who teach it online, and they'll say, "Buy my course and learn how to do this." And
yeah,
some of them are great, but some of them are people who don't really know the software well, but they're really good at media
right.
marketing and social networking. So they do well.
Yeah, it's like people that depend on the internet for their medical advice.
Yeah.
And, I said one time that I could call myself Dr. Jim and put on a white coat and start a website on brain surgery, and I could do that. And how would anybody know, right? And I could give advice on how to do your own brain surgery. And I said,
Mm.
as ridiculous as that is, probably now with AI, it's probably even crazier. If people go into Chat GPT or one of those and find out their cure for whatever they have. But you're right. Even with, I use a program called Claude, which I find quite good. But most of the time it's pretty accurate. But sometimes I know right away this does not. you're full of shit. Basically, this isn't working. And then I call him he, because he's my buddy, but he'll come back and say, I apologize. You're right. That's not correct. So you got it. And it's like that with teachers too. Some are really good and some aren't.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like you were saying, it's wrong. There are bugs in the software.
Right.
Years ago, when something didn't work, my go-to was, what am I doing wrong? What have I not understood? And more these days, I'm realizing I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. There's a bug in the software, and now I'm fortunate enough that I have contacts. I know people at a lot of the software developers, and I can go to them and say, "Hey, XYZ isn't working," and they're like, "We know it's a bug. We're fixing it."
Yeah.
Which is one of the problems with music software. When there was hardware, if you had to buy a box, they would work pretty hard to make sure that box worked.
Right.
So when I brought home my Lexicon Reverb, they spent years making sure that it worked. With a plugin, they sell it and they figure, oh, if it's no good, we'll fix it with an update.
Yeah.
So that's why I always tell my clients, don't update immediately to the newest. And if what you have works, keep using it. Let other people, like you were, let other people be the guinea pigs. Let them test out the new version. And once we see that it's safe, then move on.
Yeah, you can get addicted to the newest update. I'm crazy that way, and there it is. I've got to have it. I know it's only beta, but it's probably not going to work. There's going to be some issues.
Yeah, I have a spare computer that I use just for that. I'll load
Uh,
the updates on it because sometimes, especially with Apple, downgrading is a pain in the neck. You don't want to do it.
Yeah,
So I have a spare system where I try all the newest and latest, and then the latest isn't always the greatest.
yeah. The first attempt by Apple at a new operating system for the Mac is usually not a good thing to embrace right away, because they're very anxious to keep ahead and get a new update out. But a lot of times they haven't done the testing that they should have.
Yeah, being first sometimes trumps being best. And I'm like, "Oh,
No, it's definitely true. So with all the things that you do and your busyness, I guess you could call it, how do you balance that with the rest of your life, with your family life and leisure, assuming you have any? How do you balance all of that?
it's a little tricky because I'm not complaining. I love what I do. There are people who work in coal mines for 12 hours a day. So
Right.
I'm sitting in a cushy chair in a nice studio. But yeah, it is because my work. I remember when I was a teacher, my job, I'd show up at 9 o'clock, I'd leave at 3:30, maybe mark a few papers, but that was the end of the day. And now I'm on call. Like it's not unusual because I have clients in LA. It's not unusual that it's coming up on midnight. I'm falling asleep and my phone goes bloop. Mark, why isn't my Pro Tool session loading? And my kids know that a lot of my work is deadline based. Uh, so I just try. You find minutes here and there to, you know, to can I spend 5 minutes with my wife today? Or um, I've read interviews with like film composers like Danny Elfman who said I was a terrible parent because I ignored but luckily, you have to make it work. I don't have any. I, I'm not the right person to ask for the magic trick for that because I've 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 been guilty of uh, not spending enough time with family in order to get work done. But
Right.
yeah,
I asked I asked Jason McCoy from the Roadhammers that question, and I asked him how he balances. He says, "I don't." He says, "It's a train wreck." That was his honest opinion. And um, I interviewed one of the guys from 5440, and he said, "The family's glad to see me leave, and they're glad to see me come back." which I,
at least
which
he's got both.
I thought that was a good answer. So, with all of the attention that AI is getting, um, how do you see that playing out in, I guess, recording technology, songwriting, all of that, and what's going to happen in the future? Do you think?
It's just going to keep getting better. I used to say, "Oh, AI, it's not very good," and then lately I was playing with some of the platforms and I gave it a prompt. I said, create a song that sounds like a 70s power ballad and, and it turned out something in about 30 seconds, which wasn't terrible.
Right.
It had a full band, it had a lead vocalist, it had backing singers, it had, lyrics that weren't inspired, but they rhymed, and the production about it sounded okay. So if it's doing that now, I can only imagine. And now you can download the tracks into your DAW, and you can tweak it, and it'll even have its own software to do that. So yeah, creating a song will become feeding prompts. Make it and but you know what? For some people, it's always been that way. Like there are producers, I suspect, who've just yelled those orders at engineers and musicians, and then they get the result.
Right.
So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little frightening. For me, with all this AI, I'm like, why can't they use that to cure cancer,
Right.
and clean the water in the world, and
Yeah.
then leave the artistic stuff for us
Yeah.
to keep doing.
Well, you see it with everything now. Like creating a video is so easy.
Mhm.
I uploaded a picture of myself, and I don't even remember what platform it was, but I said, create a video of myself talking to a large audience. And it was incredible. I mean, it had me walking around the stage, and it was just from a still photograph and speaking, and no audio, but I can add that later if I want. I can synthesize my voice and put this whole thing in. There was an audience. It's pretty unbelievable what it can do, and the cost of using it on these platforms is very little. It doesn't cost very much, so it's interesting. So as far as 905 Music and Sound, what's the future there, do you think? What are your priorities going forward?
Well, as I said, I am at the point where most of my clients are sort of closer to the middle end of their careers than they are at the beginning.
Right.
So, and look, I'm not really like I don't think I'll be doing this 30 years from now. At that point, I'd like to be retired and relaxing. But I think for the next, I don't know, 20 years, as long as I keep up with technology and I keep knowing what's current, I will have, my my peers. I'll hopefully be able to keep supporting them uh, in whatever way they need. The one nice thing about music is musicians are always going to want to make music.
For sure.
I was at a music festival and someone made a really good analogy. They said during the gold rush, there were a couple of people who became very rich because they struck gold, but there were way more people who made a comfortable living selling shovels.
Right.
so, so that's I kind of see myself as I'm the guy who sells the shovel a little bit. It's not like I'm not Longo McQuaid. I'm not selling the instruments, but I'm helping the artists get to where they want to be. I have friends who are artists. I hear their songs and they make me cry. I don't see myself as that. When it comes to music, I'm like a content provider.
Right.
I'll give you a a nicely produced music track to go behind your show. Um, and as all musicians, we all do multiple things because that's the nature of the business now. I'll teach, I'll produce, I'll write, I'll tech support. I hope to keep doing this for at least another 10, 20 years.
Excellent. No, that's great. So, Mark, thanks a lot today. This has been great. And um, have a great holiday. And
Can,
this will
can I
be
tell it? Can I tell a quick 20-second story?
absolutely no problem.
One of my clients, I'm usually very humble. I'm like, oh, I fix it for you. And he said, Mark, if you want to work with rock stars, you need to be a rock star. And it was so funny that he said that because literally just then someone texted and said, hey, I've got a job. I've got these really old recordings can you open this in a modern way and put it on a click track so we can keep recording to it? And I said, okay, I didn't know what it was. I started listening and I heard a bass. I thought, well, the tone of that bass sounds familiar. And then the voice kicked in and I was like, it's Geddy Lee.
Wow.
And I realized what I had done was I had contributed to one of his solo tracks. He doesn't even know, I'm sure, because it was all his techie people in the background. But it's just like I tell people, ask, how do you get into this business? And I'm just like, just keep doing it, keep doing a good job for people. and they will refer you, and the jobs keep getting better and better.
Well, Rush have always been into technology in their whole career, both in the studio and on stage. So they, they would definitely respect your skills.
Yeah,
That
I'm sure they don't know who I am, but they're they're people's people found me. So
Yeah, for sure. All right,
anyway,
sir. Well, have a great holiday, and this'll be up soon, and I'll let you know. Well,
thank you. You too. Take care. Thanks for doing this.
yeah, thank you.
Happy New Year.